First off, I wanted to start by saying that I've changed the channel name from Matt Heron Media to RockRealmm. I think this name better suits the channel and is easier to remember. Anyways, on to the video. Music has a profound impact on our brains. Music can reduce anxiety and has many benefits to our mental health. One era of music that always sticks out to me is the early 1990s grunge era. Grunge mainly focused on the more human side of musical artists, and instead of writing about sex, partying, and more, songs were being written about emotional pain, substance abuse, and depression. This era and feel of music was birthed in Seattle, Washington. Bands like Soundgarden, Nirvana, Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam, Screaming Trees, and more were the pioneers. Spandex and hairspray were replaced by flannel and Converse, as bands took to dressing in street clothes for performances. For those who don't know about the grunge era, songs like Smells Like Teen Spirit, Man in the Box, No Rain, Black Hole Sun, and more top 90s songs were born from this time period. Out of numerous grunge bands, shockingly 18 notable grunge musicians died at a young age. Around 85% of these deaths took place within a 10-year period, which leads to the topic of this video. The Seattle grunge movement was one of the darkest genres of music to this day. At least one band member out of almost all notable grunge bands was dealing with addiction. Seattle had a dark secret, with that secret being heroin. Heroin is an opioid taken from the various opium poppy plants in Southeast Asia, Mexico, and Colombia. Heroin first made its big splash in the Seattle music scene in the early 1990s, at first being recreational, before turning into the downfall of this flash-in-the-pan movement. In this video, I'm going to talk about some of the tragedies that happened to these musicians from Seattle in the 1990s, and we're going to start right now. And in a case that didn't include drugs but was equally as tragic and devastating, Maya Zapata, singer for local Seattle band The Gits, was walking home from a bar in 1993 when the 27-year-old was abducted. Zapata was assaulted before being murdered in a completely random attack. Her body was dumped on a lone street in Seattle. Now, Zapata's killer was completely random. It was a completely random attack, and her killer was not identified until 2002, I believe. A man named Jesus Misquia killed Zapata for absolutely no reason. It was completely random. He knew nothing about the victim, nothing at all. He saw her walking home, and he drug her into his car before taking her life and dumping her body on a lone street in Seattle. He was arrested and prosecuted in 2003, and he died in prison in early 2021. Now, this is without a doubt the most recognizable person in this case and the most popular. Kurt Cobain, who was the lead singer and lead guitarist for grunge's top act, Nirvana. Nirvana rose to fame for their 1991 hit single Smells Like Teen Spirit. Cobain, as well as his bandmates Novoselic and Grohl, rose up the ladder of fame seemingly overnight. By 1992, it was brought to the public eye that both Kurt Cobain and his wife and fellow rock star Courtney Love were both seriously addicted to heroin. Cobain began using the drug to combat the pain from a stomach issue, which quickly turned into addiction. Cobain struggled with heroin addiction for his entire career, and in April of 1994, Cobain shot up an extremely high dose of heroin before taking his own life.
In the arm.
You must have liked that. We all know about your little problem.
Oh, needles, keep them coming.
The death of Cobain marked the end of grunge and the heartbreaking downfall of the Seattle sound. After Cobain's death, the heroin epidemic in Seattle only worsened. The days of using this powerful drug recreationally were long over. Popular musicians like Lane Staley, Mark Lanigan, Courtney Love, Kristen Pfaff, and more were battling a powerful drug addiction. In 1994, Alice in Chains released an extremely heavy album titled Jar of Flies, which featured Lane Staley's struggles in song form. For those who have not listened to this album, I seriously recommend it, as it is very emotional and it is just a great piece of music to listen to. In 1994, bassist for Courtney Love's band Hole had gotten clean and sober and decided to leave Hole and leave Seattle. Kristen Pfaff made the move back home to Minneapolis and decided to return to her Seattle apartment to retrieve the rest of her belongings. Kristen arrived in Seattle in June of that year, and less than 24 hours after arriving, the 27-year-old bassist was found dead in her bathtub of a heroin overdose. Unfortunately, like so many Seattle alumni, Kristen had fallen off the wagon and relapsed, unfortunately dying. In 1995, Layne Staley returned to music, with Alice in Chains releasing their self-titled album. The album had a more metal feel to it compared to the group's traditional grunge sound. Layne was reportedly very unwell during this time, and the toll heroin took on him was visible. In 1996, Layne's ex-girlfriend, Demery Perot, died of a heroin overdose after battling years of addiction and health issues. This was starting to turn into a very scary issue, as musicians were dropping dead left and right. By the time 1998 rolled around, Seattle was an extremely dark place. Grunge was long over, and musicians who once thrived in the limelight had completely fallen into darkness. From 1990 to 1999, Andrew Wood, John Baker Sanders, Kurt Cobain, Kristen Pfaff, Mia Zapata, and more were all dead at a young age. In 2000, Screaming Trees frontman Mark Lanegan got clean and left Seattle. In April of 2002, Layne Staley tragically died of a speedball overdose, a mix of heroin and cocaine. Layne had not been in the public eye for nearly 6 years at this point. Staley's death marked the end of Seattle's mean streak on grunge musicians, and it seemed if you wanted to escape the city's dark grasp, you had to physically leave Seattle. And even now, as of fairly recently, Chris Cornell, 5 years ago now, took his own life. After a show in Detroit, Michigan, Chris Cornell went back to his hotel room before tragically taking his own life. And even as us as fans look back on this period, there's only a few sole survivors from the grunge period. Courtney Love, Dave Grohl, Chris Novoselic, and more like that, Jerry Cantrell, the guys from Alice in Chains, the guys from Screaming Trees, the remaining band members of Hole, Nirvana, Pat Smear. You know, these people are still alive, but the amount of grunge musicians, nearly 20 grunge musicians, all died between the years 1990 to 2017. In my opinion, this was the darkest era of music I have ever witnessed. What other era of music has had this many just tragic stories, tragic lives, and tragic deaths than the 1990s Seattle music scene? It's extremely tragic. The music is tragic. All of it is just tragic, and it's definitely extremely intriguing. I'm going to leave this video here. Seattle was an extremely dark place during the 1990s, and the only way to escape its dark grasp was to leave. And I guess I will find this out myself, as in less than a month's time, I will be in Seattle to shoot some very special projects and just take in the experience of being in the city. So yeah, you heard it here first. I will be in Seattle. I will be filming and I will be uploading it, so I'm looking forward to sharing with you guys what I capture there. And that's it for this video.